What does Nebraska mean in 2024 as a road opponent? We'll tell you coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team fast and for free. Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, welcome back. Happy Monday. Probably looking at a quieter week, I guess, for Nebraska football, but Nebraska baseball will heat up downtown at the Big Ten baseball tournament. Got a few different questions, and we're, as we're getting close to sorting through the schedule and getting TV announcements and game times and stuff like that, we were thinking about Nebraska as a road opponent and its standing in the Big Ten conference. And Mitch came up with something very interesting that I don't know that I would have thought of in a million years, or at least one of Mitch's colleagues. Mitch, tell him what Scott Docterman saw as an oddity on Nebraska's schedule this year.
Yeah, so I was talking with Scott, who covers Iowa, last week, and Scott wears many hats. He also covers a lot of Big Ten governance topics, and he's been looking at schedules recently as the TV networks hash things out, and we started to hear some kickoff times. I think Connor will get some more coming up. Some Friday dates will be known. And Scott dropped this little bit of knowledge on me. I was actually kind of stunned by it, and I want to discuss whether this is actually a thing or not. Nebraska in 2024 will be the homecoming opponent for all four of its Big Ten road foes before Thanksgiving weekend. All four.
I can't believe that. I cannot believe that. And it takes on a little bit of a different light now. That's something that we should talk about here. But you're right. So you cross-check the other schedules. September 28th, Nebraska's at Purdue. It's their homecoming. October 19th, Nebraska's at Indiana. It's their homecoming. October 26th, the very next week, Nebraska's at Ohio State. It's their homecoming. And then 3 weeks later, Nebraska's at USC, November 16th, and it is their homecoming. So I don't even know what to do with that information other than the obvious, which is, homecoming games traditionally have been against teams. You schedule teams that you think that you could beat. And I looked at those other teams' schedules and I thought, well, Nebraska's not the easiest on there in a lot of cases, but I don't know. It gets you really thinking about Nebraska's place in the league and what their opponents feel about them.
So there's a sweet spot, I think, for a homecoming game. Like, you don't want to schedule it against the worst draw in the league because it's not going to generate enough excitement to want to bring people back. And I think people of a certain generation look at homecoming a little bit different. I don't know if you're under 30, if you're like, you might not even be aware that there's a homecoming game. That's just my perception,
right? As
a person who's in his 40s, I'm not super aware of homecoming games, but I recognize what they are. And I remember when Nebraska would generally play like Kansas every year for homecoming. And, I think Northwestern in the Big Ten used to be a very common homecoming opponent. You want to play a team that you think can make for an exciting weekend that brings alumni back, but you also have a strong chance to win. So Michigan is not generally a homecoming foe for a lot of teams these days because you don't want to see a 48-7 game in your stadium that goes against you with all of your alumni who chose to come back for homecoming. So is that Nebraska? Is that what Nebraska is? I think it is after 7 consecutive losing seasons. It's the non-threatening opponent in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the records just as the division era now comes to a close in the conference. And Nebraska has basically been record-wise the worst, the second worst team in the Big Ten since that split, which is 10 years ago now. second or third worst. I mean, they're right down there at the bottom of the conference. It's depending on which kind of metric you're looking at. And at the same time, they do bring, some sort of cachet with them, just as as history would tell you. I don't know how many, less and less people every single day care about that or think about Nebraska in the 90s. But you're right, it does strike some sort of a nice little cross section in between. I think we could beat these guys, and it'd be fun to beat them. So why not just put them on the kind of homecoming weekend? But like you said, Mitch, I don't know how much people are actually care about the homecoming thing at all, but it does represent something kind of historic. And you're right, Nebraska's got to start like right now. I mean, they got to start right now winning games, as your brand strength is as important as it will ever be as you look forward, and it's all uncertainty everywhere. I mean, how many people watch you on TV? And that's really, really, really important. So Nebraska has to start right now doing that. Otherwise, they might get lost in the shuffle.
Nebraska used to be the team as a road opponent that you hated to play because it was always a loss. And then Nebraska became the team that everyone loved to beat, where even though Nebraska may not be the number one team in the country, or wasn't the number one team in the country, 5-10 years previously, it was still a game that teams would tear down the goalposts or rush the field every time Nebraska went down on their stadium. And then it became kind of the game that was like, oh, this is a nice win. We beat Nebraska. Like that's stick your chests out. And, you don't want to get to the place where it becomes the game that like people aren't even showing up for. And we've seen that a little bit, I think, which is maybe more indicative of apathy at some of the stadiums that Nebraska's visited in recent years. Like when Nebraska goes to, I don't want to use Iowa because there's more at stake there than just, the opponent. It's more of it's a rivalry. But when Nebraska goes to Wisconsin, when Nebraska goes to Illinois, I do feel like there's still just a bit of the, hey, this is a game we should go to if you're the fan of that team. But, I've also seen it at Michigan State, where I don't think there's that same kind of feeling. And as the Big Ten gets larger and expands and you bring in these West Coast teams, that's going to become even more and more of a possibility if Matt Rule's Huskers don't get it together and start to live up to their history. Doesn't need to be a top 5 team, but it needs to be a team that you just are a little bit fearful of coming into your stadium.
A couple of things. I mean, first of all, I think this is something that people have been able to identify as Nebraska, is now, getting closer to 2 decades than they are one, being in the Big Ten Conference. This is something that they lost as when they left the Big 12. They lost the opponent. I mean, you mentioned Kansas before, Missouri, Kansas State, whatever, and those teams had their success against Nebraska. When they did, they really, really enjoyed it. But I mean, for years and years, Nebraska just beat down on those teams year in and year out. And there was this kind of aura that built up during that period of time. Obviously, Nebraska was having national level success as well. But when you do that over and over and over again for years and years and years, it just becomes kind of ingrained in the DNA of that matchup and that quote unquote rivalry. And so when Nebraska joined the Big Ten, they were a little bit more vulnerable. And you didn't have that history with them. They didn't know, they don't think of Nebraska as a national championship caliber program. But, Nebraska kind of puffed out its chest a little bit. And I think teams right away especially enjoyed beating Nebraska. And then they did it kind of constantly for a while now. And that's kind of where Nebraska has sort of been. So I think there's a much, much different feeling that Nebraska has toward its Big Ten rivals, rather than the ones that they left over in the Big 12 North.
You know what? There's a little bit of irony in the fact that UCLA and Washington are 2 of the teams that are coming into the league, because I think the fans of those schools might actually remember Nebraska as more of a powerful program than what the Huskers have been in recent years. I don't know that I would say the same about USC and Oregon. Nebraska doesn't have the history against Oregon, just the recent home and home when Nebraska was in the Big Ten. And then USC, Nebraska's never beaten USC. But UCLA and Oregon have been on the wrong side of some beatdowns from Nebraska, and their fans have seen it in their stadium, and they've seen it on TV in Lincoln, and they've played in bowl games, and that Nebraska's been, at least somewhat successful in. So, in the case of UCLA, so that's something else to add. One thing I want to finish this conversation with is I don't think the Big Ten is set to put homecoming games on in its Friday night slot. That's one thing maybe that you can equate to homecoming. The league is going to know that there are festivities built around that weekend, that schools like to, have a Saturday game for homecoming. So Nebraska's, of course, playing the road game on Friday night in the league at Iowa on Black Friday. But I would expect with this revelation that Purdue, Indiana, Ohio State, and USC are all homecoming games, that those are going to be Saturday games. So we'll get a Friday schedule by the end of May, I think. And now I will say I don't expect those games to be Friday. Where you asked me a week ago, and maybe I would have before realizing the little homecoming factoid.
Yeah, interesting. And those were definitely the games that we thought about before. And given that those are Nebraska's only road possibilities in the conference, it's sort of interesting to think about what might come after that. I'll leave you with a stat before we take a quick break here. Nebraska hasn't lost a homecoming game, their homecoming game, since 2018. In that, well, I guess 2020. We're taking 2020 out. They've played Purdue, Northwestern, and Indiana over that period of time. So
Rutgers is the game this year. So there you go. Chalk it up. That's a victory. After the break, what are we going to talk about after the break? After the break, we're going to get into some of what Troy Dannen had to say late last week. We heard about Memorial Stadium and the future of Memorial Stadium and a renovation that is still happening, but looks much different. So that's next. Stick with us. All right, quick break to tell you about LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help you find the right pros for your team fast and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a job. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you are not looking on LinkedIn, you are looking in the wrong place. Another stat, 86% of small businesses on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back. All right, we're through another weekend, getting closer to the month of June. Some things that happened around the state of Nebraska this week. Carter Nelson, the much anticipated future tight end for the Huskers out of Ainsworth, he won the Class D long jump championship at the Nebraska State High School track meet with a jump of more than 23 feet. I noticed that Rowdy Bauer, the future Husker, also out of Norfolk, walk-on, does not have the same kind of hype around him that Carter Nelson does, but he won the all-class long jump, actually out-jumped Carter. So congrats to both of those guys. This is maybe the slowest week of the year around the Nebraska football program. Finals are done. A lot of the players will spend these next few days going home, seeing family. Coaches are still out visiting high schools around the country, although many of those high schools are finishing up school. So the majority of the recruiting in the spring is winding down. Big Ten baseball, as we mentioned, is set for this week in Omaha. Starts Tuesday. Nebraska is playing Ohio State at 2 p.m. at Charles Schwab Field. We'll talk more about that tomorrow on the show. Also, Connor, I went to the Royals game yesterday. Saw a victory.
Look like you got a little sun there. You should have worn a hat.
Yeah, I was in the shade, so this is probably more from my my coaching days on the diamond, but yeah, I've started to get my my baseball standing in the first base coach's box tan
Nice.
for the summer. It's really unfortunate then when the season's over and like I go to a lake or a pool or something like that because strangely I do not coach with my shirt off. So
Yeah.
big time baseball coach's tan. But Royals it was great to see. Saw to tie this back to Nebraska, saw a nice photo of Alex Gordon in the stadium concourse that was displayed nicely. They honored his team from 2014. That was the American League champions. It was the 10-year anniversary of that, and I got myself a Greg Holland bobblehead yesterday.
Nice, very good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I love that 2014 team, but we could spend 6 episodes talking about that team. We probably shouldn't.
Yeah. So should we talk about the stadium? What'd you think? What'd you think of the news that came out Friday?
It's interesting. It's certainly a change. I mean, it's there's no. I mean, basically, the main takeaway here is, I mean, remember when this was announced as this giant, $450+ million project to blow up South Stadium and make it a completely new and different thing. What we just saw was no plan for South Stadium at the moment. I mean, at least it's on hold for a long time now, and now they're going to put chairbacks in East and West Stadium, and that won't even start for another 2 years. It's and I think there is an understandable thought process from administrators all over the country to look at some things that are coming down the pipe here with revenue sharing with student athletes and back damages that are going to have to be paid as part of a suit and a settlement there, which is important. But man, I do wonder if anything major is ever going to happen with the stadium now.
I know
it just that's the way it feels to me at this moment if it's getting put off.
Yeah, we talked about this last week. You can go back and check it out on our feed on Apple, Spotify. Check out the video on YouTube. We did an episode about Nebraska's $450 million pending question, and then got answers from the new AD who took a couple of months to look this thing over. I think the big headline, Connor, is that college sports just continues to change. And with it, universities have had to reallocate finances and make decisions on the fly. And I do agree with Troy Dannen in the statement that he made that college athletics is different today than it was last October when this project was announced. And often you'll hear like, hey, college football is a lot different than it was 10 years ago. And now we're saying, and I'm agreeing with the notion that it's different than it was 6 or 7 months ago when Trev Alberts laid this out. So different times call for different decisions. The fact remains, as we discussed last week on the episode about this topic, that other schools are still going all in with this. So the question that I will ask is, are they making a mistake? Is Kansas, is Missouri, is Northwestern? Northwestern doesn't really have an option. It needs a new stadium, but yeah. Are these schools making mistakes in investing hundreds of $millions in stadium projects when there is this new pressing need, as Dannen spelled it out, a $20 million or more new line item that's coming onto his budget? What do you think?
Well, I mean, as we talked about it with Missouri, when we brought this topic to light last week, I mean, and then you'll see when Northwestern Stadium's built, and you'll see when, and it's going to be rough for a couple of years for them. And you'll see when Kansas Stadium is built, they got to be elsewhere. They're going to play games at Arrowhead and at Sporting Park. But I think when those stadiums go up and they're done and they're able to rechristen them, you'll be like, man, this is great. And they're really set up for the future. I go to, you see them all the time, Mitch, Big Ten road games. I mean, I think Minnesota does it as well as anybody in the conference, and their stadium is nice and quaint, and it's new, and it was built 15 years ago, and it's comfortable. I think that's the key word. Nebraska's Memorial Stadium just isn't comfortable right now, and so at some point you're going to have to do something with that thing, and I do think those schools that have been a little bit proactive in this, we'll see the advantages of it in a couple of years. And Nebraska, and by the way, the prices for these things are only going to go up. Stadiums that used to cost $500 million now cost $1 billion, and it's just it's just going to keep going in that direction. So you almost have to strike as soon as you can and worry about it later. But that's not the edge that Nebraska's taking right now.
You know who else is investing and just announced a project? Penn State is doing a $700 million renovation of Beaver Stadium, and the Nittany Lions, Pat Kraft, Matt Rule and Troy Dannen's good friend, the AD in State College, they're moving full speed ahead with this. So that's about as similar profiled of a program as you can find to Nebraska. Same conference, of course. We try to compare Nebraska to these other schools that are geographical neighbors in Kansas and Missouri.
Wisconsin's in the process of upgrades, or maybe just got finished with some as well. I mean, at Camp Randall, we're talking about uncomfortable places to watch football games, like old school brand programs. And so, the profile is pretty similar in that.
Right. And Nebraska's still upgrading to be clear. If you've not followed the news, this is still the same scope, Dannen says, but the sequence and the timing are different, and they're going to go after the East and the West first. Basically, they're going to fix the parts of the stadium first where they can make the most money. And it's a financial issue, and he's an AD who thinks very much about his budget and, wants to continue to be responsible. And Nebraska has been as responsible financially as any athletic department in the country and not incurring debt like so many of them do. So that's commendable. It's going to cost athletic departments a lot of money moving forward to share revenue with student athletes, which seems inevitable, but we'll see. I don't believe you have to sacrifice spending on facilities in order to be competitive with NIL. I think there's a way to do both, and I'll be real interested to see where Nebraska goes in the near future with this project in attempting to allow that to happen.
Yeah, move yourself into the future. We'll be back after this. We got one more little topic for you guys based on that schedule. We'll come back and talk about that. But speaking of moving into the future, move yourself into the future by the way you intake sports. So if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down all the volume with Stephen A. Smith telling you about the Knicks, make sure to switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we roll on in the NBA and NHL playoffs. Baseball is rolling, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, $150 win or lose. Sadly, my Denver Nuggets have been eliminated, but we still have a chance for the Midwest here. The Pacers are still in it. The Timberwolves are still in it. And so you can take advantage of those opportunities to take down the big dogs like Dallas and Boston. Bet on everything: home runs, slap shots, slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. That's with FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Head to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. That is with our friends from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so since we started talking about tidbits of the schedule at first, there will be some new teams entering the fray in the Big Ten, and maybe you're holding out for that one road trip. Maybe you need to change the priorities as Nebraska gets closer and closer to like a bowl game. Maybe you could take a bowl trip at some point this year. That's off the table. We're giving you the 4 road game options, or the 5 road game options for Nebraska this year. You got the opportunity to go to Bloomington, Indiana. You got the opportunity to go to West Lafayette, Indiana. You got the opportunity to go to Columbus, Ohio, Los Angeles, or Iowa City. Now, I can't help but notice, Mitch, there is one city that is a little different from the other 4 in that category.
Which is that?
but let's include, the time of the year that you're going, where in the season, what the weather could be like.
The game.
What's your best? Yeah, the game. What's your best trip out of that?
Well, West Lafayette's off the table. Been there. It's a Big Ten West town, and no Big Ten West anymore, but been there plenty of times. I'll be there again, but it's not what I would recommend for Nebraska fans who are excited about Matt Rule's team and say, I'm getting out on the road this year. I'm going to a road game. You probably don't need me to tell you this, but Purdue is not going to be the most all-encompassing great trip. Bloomington's interesting because Nebraska's not been there much, and it's a good college town. I'm excited about Columbus, but I don't know that the game in the Horseshoe is necessarily going to be the one that, and I have Nebraska wins, sure, but the chances of that are the lowest among all of these. I'm going with LA. Iowa City, again, been there plenty of times. LA, no better way to escape the early cold weather in Lincoln than to go to LA a week or so before Thanksgiving, get into the Coliseum, looking likely for like a Saturday game because we said it's homecoming for the Trojans. This is maybe not vintage Lincoln Riley USC, like what it could be in a few years if he gets to the place that they want to be. So for me, it's an easy choice. It's LA.
So here's the rub with LA, and it's not a problem, if you like warmer weather. But Nebraska over the next 2 years is going to be taking a trip to the LA area in both years. They're going to go to UCLA next year. So you do have an opportunity if you want to go to West Lafayette instead this year to go to LA next year. That's the obvious answer. And it's Nebraska and USC. Like it's cool. I think there's a plenty of intrigue with USC and how they're going to be post Caleb Williams and how they're going to be joining their new conference and everything. So next year's road slate, by the way, Nebraska in conference goes to Maryland, Minnesota, Penn State, and UCLA. There's some fun ones in there. There's a couple East Coast trips. Penn State's always unique. Minnesota, I think, is the best road trip, like one of the best road trips in the conference, just in terms of it's close, it's convenient, it's a big city, comfortable stadium, like I said before. Great cheese curds, great beer, things like that. Like nice people. I love the Minnesota road trip, so that's a pretty good look for 25 as well.
I love the Maryland trip because I'm kind of I'm a history nerd and I like spending a day on a Friday in DC and going and seeing some museums, things like that. So I love that trip. That's an underrated trip. The stadium itself, okay, whatever, but that's 2025. I'm really looking forward this year for personal reasons just to going to Ohio State, because my first trip ever now I've been to Columbus many times, but my first trip ever for a football game at Ohio State was the season opener in 2020. Oh. And guess what? The stadium was empty. I parked right next to the door. I don't believe that I got the Ohio State experience in the COVID year. So can't wait. It was like watching a game, on TV. I mean, we didn't even talk to the players in person, and Scott Frost after the game, we were on Zoom with him from upstairs. So I'm looking forward to that one, and I want to see Columbus on a football weekend. I was there for my first time ever in Columbus, actually, since we're getting to postseason baseball here, was the 1999 NCAA baseball regional, the first postseason for Dave Van Horn. Went to baseball there and covered that, but never for football outside of the COVID year.
So I'm thinking back on Ohio State trips here, and just if my memory serves me right, Nebraska's been there 3 times in the Big Ten era.
2016, for 12, sure.
The 63-36. Yeah. And then 2016 was 62-3. And then 2020. And did they go back in 2022? No, that was the Michigan year. So maybe they've only been there. Gosh,
it hasn't been a good place for Nebraska to visit. Now there've been some good Ohio State games in Lincoln, and including a win. But yeah, going to the Horseshoe has been a bit of a house of horrors for Nebraska. I mean, that 2016 game, it just kind of blew up the season. Nebraska was in a good place. And that's, that's kind of where Nebraska could be this year. 2024 and 2016, the schedules are very similar. That's the year where in 16 and Mike Riley's second year, where again, a coach's second year, schedule much easier in the first half. They started 7-0, got into the top 10 nationally, lost an overtime game at Wisconsin. Things still seemed okay. And then you go to Columbus and just get obliterated. And Tommy Armstrong got hurt in that game, had to go to the hospital in the middle of the game.
Triumphantly ran back onto the field.
He did. Yeah. Yes. Down by 50 points. I'm here. I'm back.
Yeah.
So Nebraska does not need a repeat of anything similar to that playing out.
I did forget about the 18 Frost first year when they went up there and played them pretty well. It was 36-31.
Yeah.
Adrian threw a backwards pass that ended up in a turnover. That was the game that I'm pretty sure Caleb Lightbourne missed the ball on the tee. They were trying to do a surprise onside kick and he just missed it. Yeah. So there were some things that went wrong in that game, even though they competed pretty well. So those are the trips to Ohio State. 4 of them, including 2020, and only that one game in 18 has been remotely competitive.
So you taking LA?
I am taking
your
LA.
choice.
That is officially my answer. Yes.
Okay. All right. We'll do more of this kind of stuff as the offseason goes on because we need things to talk about, and it's fun to talk about traveling around the Big Ten. So look for that. Stay with us all week. Big Ten baseball. We'll find more football stuff to talk about. Maybe splash in some Husker hoops. Fred Hoiberg's getting close to being done with constructing his roster for the 24-25 season too. So thanks for listening today. I want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, that's the name. It's here for you 24/7 covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.